Tony now is going to be giving us a little bit of a kind of setting the scene as to what is coming next. So over to you, Tony.
Great, thanks very much indeed. And thanks, Jeff, for that introduction. What I'm going to do now is probably 5 or 6 minutes, I hope, and leave a little bit of time for calm afterwards. I want to talk a little bit about the point of the day to start with. Why are we all here? Well, I mean, picking up what we've already heard, I think the next stage now is to raise the temperature, raise the expectation, because we need to make a big stepwise change. The point I want to make is that baby steps are no longer an option. We've all seen the statistics. We all know what's happening. So we need to make a big stepwise change. So how do we do that in a small group like this? Well, I think we're going to, it's fairly high risk. We're going to try and do something which is fairly emergent, fairly organic. And what I want to do for the rest, what we'd like to do for the rest of the session is to try and encourage nuggets of inspiration from all of you. Not just one or two of us, but all of us. We're all going to try and find those nuggets of inspiration to springboard forward. But actually what I thought I'd do to start with is to review where we are in the great scheme of things. So if I can share my screen, give me a second. You all know this stuff, and I know that, but I think it still bears retelling. Where actually are we when it comes to the climate emergency? Well, you know this graph. This is the Keeling curve. This is the gradual increase of carbon dioxide over the years. Yet familiar stuff. The point I want to make, though, is actually, even as environmentalists, do we really get it? Do we really get the scale and the intensity of the emergency? Do we really get where we actually are on this graph? We know about this increase before the Industrial Revolution, 280 parts per million. Now it's heading to 420, 50% increase. We know about that. We know we've tried all sorts of things to actually address that problem. So we know things have been going on. And yes, of course, there's a lot has been going on. And look at this, just for when it comes to various conventions and climate conferences, particularly the UN Convention on Climate Change there, roughly about 1992. Yeah, so a lot's going on, but still that curve goes up without the slightest dent, the slightest downturn. And I want to give you a really shocking statistic. I mean, looking at that, that's bad enough. 1992-ish, we all signed the Framework Convention on Climate Change. We were going to solve climate change. That's when the COPs started, the Conference of Parties. That's when they started. There were going to be plans to address climate change. What happened? Since 1992, about half the carbon dioxide that's ever been emitted has been emitted. Think about that. Since 1992, we've emitted more carbon dioxide than the entire history of the human race before 1992. That is the way exponential growth works, and there's not the slightest dent in that coming down. Now that's shocking. We're now almost committed to 1.5 degrees of temperature rise, which will bring major changes, and it's likely to be much, much more. So, you know, this is something we really need to consider. You know, things are not slowing down. Let's put this into a bigger context. And again, I think most of you have probably seen these sorts of graphs, but I think it's salutary to look at this. We've been around for roughly 200,000 years. This is a compressed scale, as I'm sure you'll see. So we've been around for 200,000 years as a species, about 1 million years as a genus, as a family of species. But look at this graph. The temperature range for about the first, well, nearly 800,000 years has been all over the place. Temperature and climate has been very, very variable until we get to the Holocene period, which we are living in. We are living in a 10,000 year period of really unusual climate stability. Seasons have been predictable, the weather has overall been benign, and only in the last 10 to 12,000 years has that period been like that. And only in that period has it been possible to develop agriculture and to develop civilization. Before that, 200,000 years ago, we were no different. We were just as bright as we are now. But only in the last 10,000 years have we developed agriculture and civilization. We are bringing that period to an end. Look at that graph at the end there. That's in Fahrenheit, so the figures are bigger than you think than you're used to. But you can see the trajectory. We are bringing to an end a stable period in the Earth's climate on which we rely totally. So that's a bit of a shock. And this is happening in the very quick future. Now, these are the so-called mitigation curves. You've seen the graph of carbon dioxide increase. This is the graph we now need to achieve to get the decrease. We're roughly following the black line at the moment, or should be following the black line at the moment. This is how fast we're going to have to reduce our emissions in order to get to where we need to be to stand a chance only a 66% chance of keeping below 1.5 degrees centigrade, a 2/3 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees centigrade. I just think about that. You know, would you get on an aeroplane if you thought there was only a 66% chance of it getting to its destination? However, we think this is optimistic. So there we are. We're following that black line, and this is how fast we're going to have to reduce our carbon emissions. Look at the past there. If we'd have started when we said we would, back in 1992, we could have reduced emissions by about 3 or 4% a year. It would have been quite manageable. We could have transitioned slowly. Today, we're going to have to do it at about 10% a year. Just to put that into perspective, last year, with all the COVID restrictions, we only achieved 7% reduction. And as you all know, that's rebounded massively. So we've now had one of the biggest increases in carbon dioxide ever. So we're not achieving this even in a pandemic. Now this is a peer-reviewed graph. I've put my own interpretation on this. So this is my own kind of crayoning over to put it into perspective. I believe up until about 2015, which is a salutary date, that's the Paris Agreement, we had the chance to transition. We could have managed a transition to a low carbon future. We have passed that period. We're now in a period where we're looking at disruption. The changes are going to have to be disruptive. Now, I mean that in a technical sense. We're looking for disruptive technologies, which are going to change things quickly. We can't do baby steps anymore. So we're looking at disruptive change. And if we don't achieve that literally within the next 10 years, we're looking at catastrophic levels of change. 50% reductions in 1 year, for example. How do we do that? This is the standard chance of hitting 1.5 degrees. The result of this is probably that we're not going to hit 1.5 degrees. We're probably locked into at least 2, which is a major, major problem. Now, I thought, I put that in. You all know this stuff, I'm sure, but I think it bears retelling because I think we really have to grasp the way this graph is compressing in front of us. We're running out of time. And in my view, we're going to spend less time talking about climate change as we go through this and more time talking about how we build resilience to the changes we've actually committed ourselves to, like it or not. And I think as one of the top climate scientists in the world said, looking at these sorts of things and looking at where the future is, there are no non-radical futures left. The most radical future will be if we try to do nothing, because then there'll be the biggest radical change. So there are no non-radical futures left. Okay, I shall stop share now. As I said, you know this. We're all familiar with these graphs, but I really wanted to say that again because we do really need to get this in order to raise our game, raise our expectation, demand more. We need to imagine more. We need to demand more. And yes, of course, we need to do more. But we can't just sit on our laurels thinking, "Great, we've done well so far. We'll do a little bit more." No, we're going to have to look for stepwise change, moving into a bigger category. How are we going to achieve that? We need to up our game entirely to fight climate change and look towards resilience. So I shall leave it at that. It's a bit of a kind of heavy-hitting approach, but I think we need to have that background in order to work out where we're going to go in the future. And I think what I'll do now is to hand back to Nicola and Carrie, who are going to calm us down a bit so we can move to the next bit and think about how we actually make use of some of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.